The wind swept hard across the dusty plains, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and the faint tang of cattle somewhere far off. A woman's shawl, once white and delicate, now frayed and gray, flapped against her thin frame. Her name was Clara, and in her arms she carried her youngest child, his cheeks hollow from hunger. 2 more little ones trailed close behind, their steps sluggish, their eyes dull with exhaustion. For 3 days, they hadn't eaten more than scraps of stale bread Clara had begged from the back door of the saloon. Water from the creek had kept them alive, but not much more than that. She had walked mile after mile, her shoes worn thin, her children crying softly until even the tears ran dry. At last, on the horizon, she saw it, a ranch. Sturdy fences stretched wide across the land, corralling cattle that moved lazily under the sun. Beyond the pasture stood a large wooden house, its roof freshly mended, its porch swept clean. It was a place of order, wealth, and strength, everything Clara and her children did not have. Her heart pounded. She had begged before, but never like this. She reached into her pocket and felt the hard metal of her wedding ring, the last token of the life she once had. Her husband, God rest his soul, had given it to her on their wedding day with a promise, "You'll never go hungry if you're with me." But he wasn't here anymore. A fever had taken him the previous winter, leaving Clara with 3 mouths to feed and no way to earn a living. The townsfolk had whispered behind her back, called her cursed, and doors had begun to shut on her one by one. Her children stumbled, and Clara dropped to her knees in the dirt, gathering them close. She kissed their heads, whispering, "Just a little longer, my loves. Mama will find us food." Summoning what courage remained, Clara rose and walked toward the ranch house. She spotted a man near the corral, tall and broad-shouldered, his shirt damp with sweat from work, his hat tilted low against the sun. His movements were steady, strong, like someone who had spent his life taming both land and beast. This was rancher James McAllister, a man the townfolk respected but rarely approached. They said he was tough, a man of few words, living alone on the land he had built from nothing. Some whispered he had a heart as hard as the soil in drought, others swore he was fair and just. Clara didn't know which was true, but he was her only hope. As she neared, James straightened and wiped his brow, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the weary woman and 3 children. He didn't speak at first, only studied her with a guarded expression. Clara's throat tightened, her pride clawing at her, but desperation pushed her forward. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling, "please, I beg you. My children," she gestured to their frail bodies, "they haven't eaten in days." James's gaze flicked to the little ones, then back to her. Still, he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy as a storm cloud. Clara's hand shook as she pulled the ring from her pocket. She held it out, her voice breaking. "Please take this, my wedding ring. It's all I have left. Just give us food. I don't care for myself, just them." The sunlight glinted off the simple band, a circle of love turned into a coin of desperation. Her children huddled closer, watching with wide eyes, too weak even to whimper. For the first time, James's eyes softened. He didn't reach for the ring. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Ma'am," his voice was low, steady, carrying a weight she hadn't expected. "I don't buy jewelry, and I don't take from widows." Clara's lip trembled, and shame burned her cheeks. She began to pull the ring back, murmuring an apology, but before she could slip it away, James spoke again. "But I do feed hungry children." He turned and walked toward the house. For a moment, Clara stood frozen, unsure if she had heard right. Then he stopped and glanced back, his eyes catching hers with a mixture of sternness and something else, something she hadn't seen in a long while. "Bring them inside," he said simply. And with that, Clara gathered her children and followed the rancher, her heart pounding with both relief and uncertainty. She didn't know if she had just found a savior, or stepped into another kind of trial. The heavy oak door creaked as Rancher James McAllister pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. The house was clean but quiet, a place that spoke of order without warmth. Clara stepped hesitantly across the threshold, her children clinging to her skirts. James motioned them toward the table. "Sit," he said simply, then disappeared into the kitchen. Clara lowered herself onto the bench, her hands trembling. The children stared at the wide table, their eyes darting to the shelves lined with jars of preserved fruit, flour sacks stacked neatly in a corner, and a pot simmering on the stove. For little ones who hadn't eaten in days, the smell alone was almost too much to bear. Minutes later, James returned, carrying bowls of steaming stew and thick slices of bread. He set them down without ceremony. "Eat," he ordered. The children didn't need to be told twice. They dove into the food, their tiny hands gripping spoons, shoveling bites as though afraid it would vanish if they paused. Tears filled Clara's eyes as she watched, her heart aching with both relief and shame. She had failed them, yet here they were, saved by the mercy of a stranger. "You too," James said, nodding toward her empty bowl. Clara hesitated, her pride holding her back, but her hollow stomach betrayed her. Slowly, she lifted the spoon. The stew was rich and hearty, warming her from the inside out. It tasted like salvation. James leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying them quietly. He didn't touch his own food. When the children were finally full, Clara wiped their mouths with a corner of her shawl and turned toward the rancher. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice heavy with sincerity. "I don't know how to repay you." James shook his head. "You offered me that ring. I reckon that's payment enough. But I don't take what's given out of desperation." Her fingers brushed the band still clenched in her palm. She slid it back onto her finger, feeling both shame and comfort. "Then why help us?" James's gaze drifted to the window, where the fading sun painted the fields in gold. "Because I know what it's like to go hungry," he said after a long pause. His voice was rough, but there was something buried in it, an old wound not yet healed. Clara wanted to ask, but she bit her tongue. Instead, she gathered her children close, letting them rest their weary heads on her lap. James cleared his throat. "You've nowhere to stay, do you?" Clara froze. The truth was obvious, but admitting it cut deep. "No," she murmured. "The town won't. They've shut their doors. I've no family left." James studied her for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Then you'll stay here, at least until you're back on your feet." Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "We couldn't impose." "You won't survive otherwise," he interrupted. His tone left no room for argument. Clara searched his face, trying to understand this man who owed her nothing yet offered her everything. His jaw was firm, his eyes steady, but there was a loneliness in them she recognized, the kind only grief could carve. That night, James gave up his own bed for the children, laying blankets thick to keep them warm. Clara tried to protest, but he waved her off and settled in a chair by the fire instead. For the first time in weeks, her little ones slept soundly, their bellies full. Clara sat near the hearth, the firelight flickering across her tired face. Silence stretched between her and James, broken only by the crackle of wood. At last, she whispered, "My husband died last winter. Fever took him quick. Since then, it's been one door closing after another." James's gaze flicked to her ring. "And yet you still wear it." Clara nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "It's all I have left of him, and of the life I thought we'd have." For a long while, James said nothing. Then softly he admitted, "My wife's been gone near 10 years now. Childbirth. Lost her and the baby both." His voice broke slightly, then hardened again. "Since then, it's just been me and the land." Clara's breath caught. 2 lives marked by loss, crossing paths in the wilderness of grief. She wanted to offer comfort, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she reached into her shawl and pulled out a small cloth doll, her daughter's only toy. She set it gently on the table between them, a symbol of the children's fragile joy. James's eyes lingered on it, then on her. Something shifted in his expression, something she couldn't name yet. Days turned into weeks. Clara and her children remained on the ranch, helping where they could. She mended shirts, cooked meals, and kept the house warm, while the children followed James like shadows, fascinated by the horses and cattle. Slowly, laughter returned to the home that had long been silent. James never spoke of charity. Instead, he taught the children small chores, feeding chickens, fetching water, making them feel needed rather than pitied. And Clara, though still weary, began to feel the strength of hope stirring in her chest. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the plains, Clara found herself standing beside James at the fence line. The children's giggles floated from the barn, where they played with a gentle calf. "You saved us," she said softly. James shook his head. "No, ma'am. You saved yourself when you walked up that path with your head held high, offering all you had left for your young ones. That kind of courage, it's worth more than gold." Clara blinked back tears, her fingers brushing the ring on her hand. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the faintest spark of belonging, not just survival, but the chance for a new chapter. James turned toward her, his eyes steady, his voice low. "Maybe God don't always give us what we ask for, but sometimes He gives us what we need." And as the evening light wrapped them in gold, Clara knew that what began as a plea for bread had turned into something far greater, a chance at family, at love, at life renewed.